resources that is available to us? How do we plan, and what are those best practices for us for the how we deal with change in Microsoft 365? And then what are our support options? Do we have support? Do we have the ability to get help from other sources? And secret yes is the answer. So do we have anyone that speaks Greek, that can read Greek? That would be, if so, then you probably could read this pretty famous quote. It is a quote that actually has changed just a little bit, and is so it's kind of misquoted a little bit. But really, the quote is, "Change is the only constant in life." And let's step out of the technology realm and just take in just our lives. Change is constant. Every day there's change. So when we shouldn't think that we can use technology and it not change at all, right? It does change. So Albert Einstein also said the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. So Microsoft 365 must be really, really intelligent because it changes all the time. So let's talk about the change in the Microsoft Cloud. And this really isn't just Microsoft Cloud change that is happening so quickly. It is really, compared to on-prem software, change is happening at such a fast pace, but compared to on-prem, it is so fast. But it's not just Microsoft Cloud, it's all cloud. It's all software as a service. We are in this unending loop of development, and then rolling out what we develop, and then gaining feedback, and then doing more development. And then this evergreen model is the new normal, and it is constantly changing our applications and services. For those that watch changes that are coming through our tenants, you know there are dozens and dozens of changes happening every month. If you just count the major updates, you'll find that there's so many that affect just your users and your admins. I was on a call with the team that manages the message center, and they were telling me, and this was the first quarter of this year, that there are over 40 major changes in that last month. It was 1 month, 40 major changes. It doesn't count the minor changes that some organizations actually believe are pretty major in their operations. And you might not even see all the changes because not all changes are published as messages. So this evergreen model means services constantly changing and being updated. We all know change happens, whether we like it or not. We can't decide whether we are going to pay attention or not. We have to pay attention because the changes are coming. Not only are bringing new features, but they're really changing the way we actually do the work. Not saying staying up to date will land you living in the past while your competitors, your customers, and your users move forward. Your users will find ways to implement new technology, which is really often called, that shadow IT. With shadow IT and alternative ways of using the technology, they do provide that alternative technology that provides to our users. They will adapt, and the result will be more complicated. And for us, this is a tech admin day here, really, that really presents challenges and an unsupportable environment when standardization is thrown out the window and everyone just gets what they can. Even the icons for Office have been updated. While that may not be a major change for everyone, people experience change very differently. Don't discount that your users can all think differently, and the slightest change can sometimes affect the workflow of your people. The new SharePoint home site is another example. When you change the landing page for your organization to the new SharePoint home, how will your users make sure they will be able to work well with the update? Do they know about the navigation? What is that app bar thing? And how do I actually get to the navigational elements? So we have to make sure that even if it is a small change that we perceive as being a small change for our users, we have to make sure that we are managing that change. When thinking about change, and how to manage it, one of the first things you need to think about is who needs to know when change is coming to your organization through the cloud. Who needs to know? So start off with who's keeping up with it now. Whether there's a formal process or an informal process, just know there is a process, whether you know it or not. Change is being monitored in your organization. That could just be simply users are watching and they go in and say, okay, I'm going to load the service now, whether it's an intranet on SharePoint or it's Teams or it's Microsoft Forms or whatever it is. They say, okay, well, let's see what's changed today. Have you ever heard that? I have. So whether it's simple as user just, ooh, what's changed, to having a more formal process of monitoring and review, it is being watched. So who in your organization is currently keeping up with the change in your organization? Is it IT? Is it a formal, technology specific type of monitoring? Is it a training department that is in charge of making sure that the tools are adopted in your organization? Power users, those that are maybe champions in your organization in those departments, working with everyone, first people go to say, hey, I don't understand how this works, can you help me? Who is it? What is the process? Then we need to ask who should be alerted to changes. Just because there's a process, whether informal or formal, doesn't mean all of the people that are watching are that's just it. No one else needs to watch. That is not true. If you'd like to answer any of these in chat, I would love to see your responses. But for every organization is different in their experience with dealing with change, but specifically with Microsoft 365. So when you think about how to handle the change for your organization, ask yourself these questions and really to frame how you respond to it. What are your pain points in regarding to change? What is it? Where does the rub come into play, right? When there's a change, it affects your organization, whether it's just the user has to click on the left side instead of the right side now, all the way to your workflow doesn't work anymore, right? And I'm not necessarily talking about a flow and Power Automate. The workflow, the way you do your business doesn't work anymore because of this change. What are your pain points? I'd love to see some of your examples of the issues and fallouts that happened. That survey link that I posted in chat, that I'd love to see your responses there as well on, and there's the questions at the bottom of how you've dealt with the fallout. And do you know about it beforehand? Do you know about changes normally in your organization? Are you at least informed about what's going on? And then how do you deal with it? I'd love to get some of that information from you. All right, let's see. And all right, so the first, I'm just pausing here because I said I'd like for your help to build my presentation. So I asked you in the survey how you're typically alerted to change. And wow, there's still responses coming in, but I'd like to just show you the responses we have now. So wow, I am very shocked. So the last time I asked this question, there was a lot of users complain. So it looks like maybe you're prepared more than most. So we have 0 find out by users complaining that something has changed. And we have small numbers for you actually see it, and then social media. But for the large part, the message center and the Microsoft 365 roadmap are what really alert you to what's going on. And actually, which is kind of funny, a couple more people responded and they chose users complain. So I appreciate you throwing those in there for me just because I said something. But it is, you see, we do find out how change happens differently, but it is great to see some of the official channels of notifying about change coming up is what you
Hey, Daniel, it looks like somebody may have muted you, so I'm going to go ahead and find you and unmute you.
Yep, I'm unmuted now.
All right, great. Thank you.
Go. Yeah. What was the last thing you heard me say? I will. Let me talk. Okay, so now that we talked about change and how we know it's coming, let's look at resources that are available to us. Okay. The first tool is the Microsoft 365 roadmap. This site is where the Microsoft product teams add posts about new features and functionality, as well as changes to existing features that will be rolling out to tenants. Okay, so what is a tenant? For those that don't know what a tenant is, it's your environment, your piece of the Microsoft 365 pie. It is your place where your services are and your security boundary is, okay, within the cloud. The Microsoft 365 roadmap has labels and categories for different products, as well as platforms in the cloud services, and has gotten a refresh here in the last month or so to be a little bit more user friendly and trying to navigate and find the updates that you're looking for. Each update has a category and status, whether the item is in development, is rolled out, or is being launched. And it really is the starting point. Now, there are announcements that are made at conferences like Microsoft Ignite or 365 EduCon or what other events that Microsoft says, hey, we're going to do this. That may not be in the roadmap yet. But when it lands to the roadmap, we do get a little bit more information, more specific information on what is it that we're looking for, what is going to be updated. Okay, that's going to be in the roadmap. It's really your first place to get official information. An ID is given to the update and everything. So that is the roadmap. Another piece of the puzzle is the Microsoft 365 Message Center. The Message Center is the location designated for announcements about products and services coming to your tenant within the next 30 to 90 days. Now, there has been some discussion about, well, that was kind of the official timing that was given. Hey, 30 to 90 days, we'll let you know. Major changes, 90 days. Not major changes, 30 days. Well, that's not really true. 30 days is actually the official major change. They try to get it in there by then. They try, right? So we've seen many times where we will have updates in there and it's, oh, we forgot to let you know, but it's already rolled out, right? That is unfortunately the way it works, and we can't change it. And the team knows it is a pain point, and are working on it. They work with the product teams to make it faster, but that's the way it works. Okay. The logical movement of announcements go through the roadmap, and then when it's ready, within those timeframes of about, some get 30, some get more, which is there's a balance between whether you get more, right, more time frame but less details about what exactly is being developed, and less time frame but get more details about what is being developed. But the logical movement is from the roadmap to the message center with enough notice for you to plan for that change. If you're using Planner in your organization, one nifty trick is you're able to sync your message center to Planner, to Planner services into a bucket to help you decipher what's going on, but to help you assign those to people for review. So just want to give you a nice tip there. Right. And I would be remiss to mention, a shameless plug here, that I do co-host a podcast every week. We do it live on YouTube, and then we also publish it as an audio podcast called the 365 Message Center Show. We titled it so that everyone wouldn't be confused. What we do is we cover the important announcements for that week, and we tell you our experiences with my co-host, Daryl Webster in Auckland, New Zealand. our experiences with the updates, what we think is going to happen, what we may know from previous discussions with the Microsoft product team. So we'd love for you to join us on the podcast. You can go to messagecenter.show. If you want to subscribe and get alerts on YouTube, there's a link on that page for the YouTube, but you can subscribe using whatever audio podcast tool as well to the audio podcast. Okay, would love to have you join us. Then also the tech community. The tech community, which is techcommunity.microsoft.com, is a great place to keep up with updates, but also keep up with what is going to happen, and then also kind of maybe the aftermath of what happened. So first we have communities. You can engage with Microsoft and with other experts, MVPs, as well as other experts in their field, to discuss from Azure to Yammer what is happening and give your questions on not just changes, but also, hey, something looks like it's not working. The next is the tech community is where blogs are housed for Microsoft for most of the services in Microsoft 365. So this is where you can learn about announcements and details on roadmap items. Those blog posts help explain those, 2 or 3 sentence roadmap items before we can start playing with the tool and the changes that are happening. So tech community, make sure you subscribe. Another tidbit of knowledge here is that all of those blogs have an RSS feed, and you can suck those announcements in various ways. I actually do it using Microsoft Teams. So I follow blogs and it posts a message in Teams so I can keep track of all of those blog announcements and I don't have to go to the page every time. All right, up next, let's talk about how we can plan for change, because if we fail to plan, then we plan to actually fail, right? The first thing we need to do when coming up with a plan is to really know those changes that will impact, right? Who will it actually impact? We must know our users and know how they work. What distinct groups do you have in your organization? Key users, architects of solutions, admins for components of the service. Key users could be those that are most vocal in your organization, or those that have the most power to make change based on impacts in changes in environment. I work with a lot of clients. I'm a consultant, and I work with clients, and it is different in every organization. Some organizations, the CIO is very involved with what's going on, and if something is broke, then they're going to be yelling and trying to get things done. Maybe not yelling, but they're going to be very engaged. Other times it is a director, or maybe it's the CEO, or for your organization, you have to identify who those important people are so that you can have a communication channel to where they stay up to date. Whether it's proactively staying up to date or reactively, they can go see, if something's broken, they can go see, hey, what does this mean? So how are you going to deal with that? Creators are those that create solutions within your environment, utilizing those applications. So think about, workflows or forms or sites, internet sites, or, teams. Those are your solution creators. And of course, your service architects are those that use the service to create solutions. Those are the architects are those that look at the service, look at your business, and figure out how those can marry in a beautiful way, right? And remember, each of these groups will have different needs for communication and for really how they handle the changes that are coming. So it is not a one shoe fits all. You have to figure out what is best for every one of these groups. Now, I'm not saying every user has to be contacted individually in their own preferred method, but you can't just say, oh, I posted or I did one thing, so everyone has to figure out and get that access, get that information. So it is true that every organization is unique. We all use the platforms differently and really create our own solutions for our needs. We're not only different based upon how we utilize the technology, but we're also different in how we handle change. How do we handle what's coming up? Some organizations handle that change very well and are comfortable, and some are, and on the bleeding edge of technology. I have some clients that say, yeah, change is great. Yeah, okay, something changed. They just roll with it. And then other organizations are, this is the way we do it, and it works really well. And then when change comes and breaks that process, then it is a major disruption to us. And we really need to be more proactive in understanding what's coming so we can augment and kind of steer the big ship in the direction that we need it to go. So, of course, these are two extremes, and your organization lies maybe somewhere in the spectrum between a change can wreck your business to a change is just another thing letting you know that you are on the bleeding edge and you're doing something right. The last thing I'll point out is you really need to be taking into account how your organization is set up to allow for time to be spent on monitoring change. Do you have dedicated resources available to monitor and communicate the changes? Or is this something that someone is going to have to add to their job role that they really don't have time for anyway? This is an important consideration, because if you have someone who has time dedicated, whether it's a whole role or it's half of their time to monitor and communicate changes, versus an organization that is just thrown on somebody and assumed that maybe somebody is monitoring this, there are going to be different ways of reacting to this change depending upon who's monitoring and how you are really focusing on it. Okay, let's talk about best practices. Given all those resource considerations and the fact that change is going to happen whether you want to or not, let's talk about how we can utilize best practices that I've seen in Microsoft Cloud to deal with change. So big question I asked in the survey, and we'll get to the results in just a few moments, is how many tenants do you have in your organization? Most organizations I have found only have one. So what should we be doing is actually having more than one. We should have at least two. I have worked with organizations that have more than two, but at least two is the best practice for dealing with change in Microsoft 365. One would be for development and one for production. Development would be where we turn on a targeted release for everyone. And targeted release is how we get those releases sooner, most of the releases sooner, and test it out and evaluate how it would affect our processes. Then in production, we would be on standard release, meaning that the rollout will be delayed per the rollout schedule, and it gives us time to augment production before the release happens. Okay. Now, the first question I always get when I mention this is, wait, that means I have to pay twice as much for the services because I got to put everybody's license in development cloud as well? No, the development tenant doesn't have to have the same users as you have in production. You need enough users to test. That's it. So whether that's 2 people, 2 licenses, or it's 20, depending on your organization, everyone will be different, but you don't have to have everyone licensed in that development tenant. Now, I do mention here, you can also have a kind of a third layer in that if you have standard release for everyone, but you could also mark certain people as targeted release in that production tenant. Now, I will say that means you need to keep that in mind, because some users, maybe your testers or your developers, they will see things coming to them earlier for a lot of the updates. Not all of the updates have this, but they'll see those updates in the standard, in the production tenant faster than everyone else, which means they may have an issue, raise an issue with your support desk, or raise an issue with someone they work with, and it looks different than what it is for them. So we just have to keep that in mind. All right, so survey results. How many tenants do you have? I'm going to pop over there and see what you said. All right, let's show you the results. All right, so for the most part, it looks like that most of you have, well, not most of you, the biggest bucket is just one, just production, 25 of the respondents. And then 16 have 2, so production and testing, and then 6 have 3 or more. All right, so what release is your production tenant set on? Standard release is the biggest, but is not the majority. Targeted release for everyone. Wow, we have some that are living on the edge just a little bit. Targeted release for everyone. And then targeted release for select users. That's what I was talking about. We just have to prepare that sometimes they will have things that break, that others will be working just fine, or their screens will look different, or their functionality is a little different. So thank you so much to everyone who responded and helped put together my presentation. All right. So let's talk about another best practice. Okay, we talked about tenants and how to set those up. Another best practice is to try to automate as much as possible the monitoring and action taking of the change that is coming. I mentioned early in the presentation that we have dozens and dozens of changes that are coming. So unless we have some sort of resource dedicated to handling change from the Microsoft Cloud, we really are not going to be able to have time to do this on our own. If you already have a full-time job doing something in your organization, then adding monitoring and taking action on change with communication and augmenting how you use the services, it's just not going to happen very well. So let's use tools to automate the notification of changes and assigning tasks about those changes that are coming. So use RSS readers. I mentioned before that the Microsoft blogs have an RSS feed that you can use to monitor, but so does the roadmap. Now, the roadmap RSS is just all of the roadmap items, so it's not separated out. You can't, not a separate RSS for SharePoint and a separate RSS for Microsoft Teams, but it is for everything. But you can utilize that, automate it, maybe do some filtering through the automation. Maybe if you're using Power Automate or some other tool, maybe you can filter out the services based upon what you need. I mentioned Planner and the Message Center before. Sync Message Center updates to Planner. That syncing has gotten way better. If maybe you looked at it at the very beginning when it was enabled, it has actually gotten way better to where items are updated. They are putting them in specific buckets. It's going to be a pretty good service for you. If you're monitoring updates, then go ahead and sync it to Planner and give it a try. And even if you don't use Planner right now, because you're able to, move those over into bucket swim lanes, if you will, to, you can assign them, you can deal with all of those changes that are coming. And I mentioned Power Automate is a great way to create flows, to take this information and do something with it, maybe putting things into Teams, for instance. One example of how to automate the 365 roadmap is have all those items automatically imported into, maybe it's a SharePoint list, right? And then manage that in SharePoint list. And if you want to learn more about lists, there's another shameless plug. I'm doing a session with Shafina right after this talking about Microsoft List, but I digress. Maybe it's pulling it in to Teams like I do. Have a dedicated channel for roadmap items or for message center items or for blog posts, and putting every one of those posts in there. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a chatty channel, lots of posts, but you can deal with it that way, right? And then perform a review. Have a review process, whether this is once a week, whether this is twice a week, every other week, whatever your process is, whatever your appetite for change is for your organization. Come up with that review. Who does this need to be assigned to? What action needs to be taken? And it really doesn't have to be this, oh, I'm going to spend hours and hours on this one change. It may, but it doesn't have to be for everything. It could just be, yeah, that's a change coming. Our users will like it. Let's mark it down. Let's make a news post on the internet about it, or put it in the weekly news post that's our newsletter on the internet, whatever, and then that'll be it. Great. But maybe it's something that we need to assign an action. There's a workflow or there's a major process that accounting uses that this is going to break. So we need to assign someone to go talk to them work with the architect of the solution that created that solution to augment what's happening in that workflow or whatever process it is, so that our business doesn't crash when this change comes. We also need to look at our communication methods for change. So how do we, really we need to consider how we communicate to those different groups that I mentioned before. So how do you communicate with the end users, your pros, your IT pros? Those are going to be different, how you communicate with them, right? You can do that via, I would not recommend sending emails out for every change, but maybe a newsletter. And my recommendation is to use the tools for that. If you're still sending out a weekly email newsletter that has all the information, I will guarantee you, not everyone in your organization is reading that entire thing. They're just not. So is that newsletter maybe something that just points to news items that were created in your intranet? Or maybe points to a Teams channel with the information, or points to a Yammer community where you're talking and discussing these changes. And then make sure it's not just a post, make sure you're using hashtags, topics that really give the users the ability to do search and find what's happening. So I suggested something like what's new, or change is happening, or some sort of topic that people can follow. Now that we talked about technology tools to help us manage this change that's coming, let's talk about really how we can use people, both internally and externally, for support. One of the best methods of helping your organization handle change and get adoption is with the Champions program. A Champions program is one that can be fairly simple, all the way to a pretty complex, well-run, well-oiled machine of a program within your organization. Organizations around the world have implemented this, and those resources are available to you that can help you guide a Champions program. And I have one resource, actually a couple resources available, and I'll show you here on the next slide. You can have internal user groups in your organization, and this can be formal. This can be, hey, we're going to meet every month. Bring your lunch, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, whenever we get back to doing in person. This is where we just come together. Maybe you do a presentation. Maybe you bring in an outside consultant like me to do a presentation on this big change that's coming. And then spend some time on, okay, here's these other changes that are happening. That it can be a really cool tool in your organization. It's a proactive tool, right? People have to come and attend the user group, but maybe you record those and make those available on the intranet to be consumed via stream. All right. And then use some tech, Teams, SharePoint, Yammer, communities. Use the technology to help communicate internally. So keep that, find a place, target what you're going to use, and then use it to publish. So at least getting information out there, whether it's, even if you don't have a defined, everyone's going to get this newsletter every week about change. Even if you don't have that, at least have a place where people can go to get that information. And then don't forget about your help desk or those first line people who answer the phone or answer the emails when there are issues. They need to be made aware of changes, and they shouldn't be the last people that are made aware, okay? Because they need to change the way they communicate with people based upon changes that are coming. All right, a couple of Champions program resources. The first is the Coffee Chat podcast, so that you can go to coffeechat.show web address, and that is a series that I did with fellow Microsoft MVP, Sarah Haase, which I'm sure a lot of you know Sarah. She's fantastic and great around this Champions program concept. So we go from, we really discussed why user adoption is so difficult, all the way down to how self-service impacts user adoption and everything in between. So that series is available free to you on YouTube. So go to coffeechat.show to find that. And the second is the Microsoft adoption site. That is adoption.microsoft.com. And if you go to that site, you'll find the Champions management platform. You'll be able to learn how to build a Champions program and get some really good resources on the Champions program. That website has a lot more on adoption other than just Champions program, but it's a great resource for it. All right, and then external support. Let's talk about what are our options. There most likely is a local user group in your area that can help you by not only providing training on a regular basis, but also giving you other people to discuss how change should be managed. If you don't have a local user group available to you, there are online user groups available. And especially in this day and age, all the user groups are online and you can join in. For both local and online user groups, simply go online, search in your favorite search engine, your city, and search for whatever technology, SharePoint or Power Platform or Teams user group, Microsoft 365 user group. Be a little proactive. They're not going to come to you and say, here's a flyer. They may, but they're not probably going to do that. You need to go search for them. Find a community you can connect with and engage with. Okay, even if it's not local, make sure you're engaging in those communities. It's not about, oh, I'm going to go watch a presentation every month. This is about helping each other. Connect with Microsoft partners such as myself to understand how the technology is changing, what resources are available to you. And let's go ahead and admit we're not all experts in everything. We're not. I'm not even, right? I know, I admit it. So we need to rely on others, have a network of people we can ask, we can call on and say, I know you're an expert in this. Please help. I have a question. Can I have 5 minutes just to ask the question and have you explain this to me? If you don't have one of those networks, make me one of those. Ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'd love to help you. Microsoft support is available to you as part of your licensing in Microsoft 365. It has gotten better. So if you've been used to on-prem support, sometimes there's a rub there with support, getting them to actually call you back or getting them to getting someone who actually knows what they're doing. But I think the support has actually greatly improved. So remember, you can always open a support case in the support site in Microsoft 365. And of course, conferences like this one and others. There's a Microsoft 365 Collab conference in Las Vegas that's happening the first week in December. The next week, there's a 365 EduCon conference in Washington, D.C., and then there's another one in Dallas at the end of January. Those are in-person conferences. If you have any questions about that, I'll be at all three. I'd love to see you there. If you have any questions about those, please let me know, or you can go on my website, danielglenn.com, and search for them. I have blog posts about them as well. Okay, so bringing this all back, keys to success. So, of course, we have to monitor updates. Remember the flow of updates. We have the roadmap, then we have the message center, and then we have Microsoft blogs. And those blog posts can come before it gets into the roadmap. They can come after the roadmap, but before the message center. And then, frankly, sometimes the blog post is not even published until you get the update itself, which is not as helpful. But those three are major areas where we need to be following what's going on. Social media is another. And then moving over to learning about those changes, the Message Center show is, again, a great resource, I think. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think so. We have several hundred people who are watching and listening to our podcast every week to get some input on see what the changes are that are coming. Make sure you're connected to a user group. Make sure you are following on socials, Twitter, on blogs, on LinkedIn, so that you can see what people are saying, those experts, those people that have been in the technology for so long, see what they're saying about the change. Is this a big deal? Maybe you've discounted it, but it's not. It actually is a big deal. Okay. And then share the information. A newsletter, I like using SharePoint News, whether you have that just in SharePoint or you plug it into Teams, however you deal with it. If you still need to use email, point them to those posts. Have an internal user group. Again, it can be informal where you call up those people, those major power users in your organization. You say, hey, let's meet. Let's meet every once in a while and talk about these things. Or maybe it's a formal group meeting like I described before. And then don't forget lunch and learns. Those bring in outside resources, those Microsoft partners or your local service organizations, bring them in. Hey, they'd love to speak to your people to really have conversations about what the changes are that are coming. And then my second to last, I just want to remind you, please go to messagecenter.show and check out all the links to the audio podcast. There's whatever audio podcast service you use. There's a link there, I'm pretty sure. You can follow our podcast, everything from iTunes and Spotify all the way down to Stitcher and others, as well as a link to the YouTube playlist. And so you can get alerts when we go live every Monday at noon Central is when we go live. Okay, I'm going to leave this up. You can, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can scan the QR code on the left-hand side or go to danielglenn.com/hello. Hi, hello, and fill out that form if you want to connect with me, ask me questions. I'll get back to you and love to hear from you. If you would like to get a copy of the slides then and resource links, you can do that by scanning the code on the right-hand side or going to danielglenn.com/MN for Minnesota, MN2021, and I'll get those slides posted within the next 10 or 15 minutes. So you'll have those slides available to you. My Twitter is Daniel Glenn, my website's danielglenn.com, and my YouTube is /DanielGlenn. All right. I did have time for questions. Fantastic. I'm going to take about 5 minutes and then give you 5 minutes to do some transitioning to your next session. I'm going to take some 5 minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand in Teams. We have quite a few people here, and I'll call on you, or you can throw it into chat. I'm going to just start looking at chat until someone raises their hand. Okay? Does that sound good? I hope. All right. I'm going to go back in.
There was one question from Dave Miller, and feel free to come off mute too, or raise your hand or throw your question inside of the chat. He asked, we use Microsoft Direct, no CSP. Is there a strong value in going with a CSP for 365?
I think the value with managed service is really handling those, what I have seen when there's outages. First thing is when there's outages, they can monitor that and let you know that there's outages proactively. Right now, if there's an outage, usually the way people learn about it is a user goes, hey, email's down, or I can't post a Teams message or whatever. And then you go to the health center and go, oh, yep, there's a message about it. So that's one way to manage it. They can also come up with solutions on managing users and self-creation or security. If there's that first line of help for your users to reset passwords and such, if maybe some reason their MFA is not working or whatever. We're not a managed service provider, but I know there are some organizations, especially large organizations, that have gone with one that see a lot of value in it, but you don't need to, right? You can sign up for Microsoft 365 yourself, but remember all the things that I've taught you here today, right? We have to monitor change. We have to keep up with that change. Not all managed service providers do that. You have to work with them to, are they actually going to monitor change and help you integrate those changes? Thanks for the question.
All right, the next question comes from Steve. From the organizations that you've worked with, what have they found is the most frustrating change that you hear most often?
Yeah, I think the frustrating changes, that we are those changes that, and like I mentioned before, that change processes, the way things work, um, and this really, because that makes you have to go do a lot of work to change the way, whether that's in Power Automate and the way you're connecting, or that's licensing. Something that used to be free is now not free. Um, so those are kind of those major changes. But I will say the biggest changes that we hear about, that we have to deal with, are those changes we don't even know about, that just get done. There are so many changes that are actually done that do not get communicated. Microsoft tweaks something, they think it's something small, so they don't tell anybody about it, yet it brings down the whole stinking service, and or changes the way you do it. And you can do all the things that I talked about, and you are going to be covered 95% of the time. But sometimes, like I said, they sneak in those little ones that they think is little, but has a major impact, whether it brings it down or it just tweaks the way things get done, the way you work with it.
All right, another question from Adam. You mentioned running 2 tenants. At what business size does that stop making sense? And do you see solo and 2-person IT departments running these 2 tenants?
I'll answer the second question first. Yes, when you say running these tenants, it really is something where, if you don't have to mimic everything that's in your organization. I think there's a little bit of overkill, making sure, every post is posted in both places, but making sure those critical processes that you have in your standard production tenant is done in a second tenant, so that when it is release is done, if your work really depends on it, your business really depends on it, then it doesn't matter how big your organization is, you need 2 tenants. If that process goes down for any amount of time and it has a major impact on your organization, then you need 2 tenants. It doesn't matter how big you are. Again, it's not like I said, managing per se 2 tenants. If you're maybe small, it's just there so that you can, when you're monitoring the changes that are happening, you see something, oh, that has something to do with that process that we have. Let's go see it in the development tenant to see if it's broken anything. Anything else? I love seeing these comments in chat about people having processes, saying yes, hook up the message center to planner. Love seeing that. And I love seeing all these names of people I know that are in here. We have people who join our show live, and I'm seeing some of their names in here as well. Thank you for being here. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised, so either I did a really good job of explaining or I didn't at all. So hopefully it is the former. Anything else? There is a mention about, Dan mentioned the latest there, you get a developer tenant as an individual. So that is true. You can have a developer tenant to test things out. You can't connect that to your organization. Of course, it's an individual developer tenant. So, it is one way that you can see updates that are coming. There are some limitations with that developer tenant that would, prevent you from really using it as that second tenant for testing. I don't really have time to go into it right now, but it can be used if you can't sign up for another one, you can get that free developer one to help you kind of understand it. But a few limitations that really, in my opinion, that really prevent it from being used as your real second tenant for testing for your organization. But thank you so much for mentioning that. That's great. All right. I'm about to wrap up. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand in Teams or come off mute and ask. Otherwise, we will be done. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm really passionate about managing change in a Microsoft world. So this was absolutely great, learning all the different things. Hopefully everybody can still see the screenshot. Click on danielglenn.com/MN2021, get the slides, connect with him, watch his show. And again, thank you for all your time. Everyone, welcome. We are now starting our sessions. Feel free to go in our chat, click on the workshop link, and then go ahead and join whatever session that you're interested in. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.